I thought coming home with the best news of my life would make my son Derek happy. Harold left me 2 downtown apartments and his beach house in Myrtle Beach, worth nearly $800,000 total. But standing in my hallway, keys still in my trembling hand, I heard Derek and Paige planning my destruction. They wanted me declared mentally incompetent within 60 days. Before I could inherit anything, my own son was stealing my future. My name is Amberly, and at 67 years old, I never imagined I would be standing in my own hallway eavesdropping on my son plotting against me. Let me tell you how I got here, because understanding my story means understanding how deep this betrayal cuts. I have lived in this modest ranch house in Westerville, Ohio, for 38 years. My late husband Richard and I bought it when Derek was just a toddler, back when the mortgage payment seemed impossible, on a school librarian's salary and a mechanic's wages. Richard worked double shifts at the garage, and I shelved books and helped children find stories that would change their lives. We were happy then, building something together. When Richard was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 51, our world crumbled. I watched the strongest man I knew waste away over 18 months, fighting a battle he could never win. Derek was only 22 then, fresh out of college, with a business degree and big dreams. Instead of starting his career, he moved back home to help me care for his father. Those were the darkest days of my life, but Derek was my anchor. After Richard died, I threw myself into being the best mother I could be. Derek struggled to find his footing in the insurance industry, so I helped with his rent when he got his first apartment. When he met Paige at a dental conference 7 years later, I welcomed her with open arms. She seemed perfect for him, driven and ambitious with her bright smile and confident laugh. Their wedding cost $18,000, and I contributed half of that amount from my retirement savings. I wanted Derek to have the celebration Richard would have insisted on. When they found their dream house in Dublin, a lovely colonial with 4 bedrooms for the grandchildren I hoped would come, I gave them $15,000 for the down payment. Every sacrifice felt worth it, watching Derek build the life Richard and I had always envisioned for him. My brother Harold was different from me in every way that mattered. Where I poured my energy into family, Harold channeled his into business. He never married, never had children, but he had an incredible talent for real estate investment. Starting with a small duplex he bought at 25, Harold built a portfolio that impressed everyone who knew him. He owned rental properties throughout central Ohio, always seeming to know which neighborhoods would flourish next. After Richard died, Harold stepped into a role I had never expected. He began visiting me monthly, taking me to dinner at nice restaurants where he would share stories about his latest deals and listen patiently while I talked about Derek and my hopes for grandchildren. Harold had a dry sense of humor and a gentleness that surprised people who only knew his business reputation. He worried about my financial security, often suggesting investment strategies that seemed too complicated for a retired librarian. Harold jogged religiously every morning, rain or shine. At 64, he was in better shape than men half his age. The massive heart attack that killed him on a Tuesday morning in September came without warning. He collapsed 3 blocks from his apartment, and despite the quick response from paramedics, he was gone before they could save him. The funeral was small, just close friends and family, but the grief felt enormous. 2 weeks after we buried Harold, attorney Samuel Brooks called to inform me that Harold had named me as his sole beneficiary. I assumed he meant some small token, perhaps his car or a few $1,000s. Harold had always been generous with family gifts, and I thought this would be similar. I scheduled the appointment at his office for this afternoon, expecting to sign a few papers and perhaps inherit enough to take Derek and Paige on a nice vacation. Attorney Brooks is a serious man in his late 40s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office walls display degrees from Ohio State University and photographs of his family. When I arrived at 2 o'clock, he offered me coffee and asked about how I was handling Harold's loss. I appreciated his genuine concern, but I sensed he had significant news to share. The inheritance documents were more complex than anything I had ever seen. Harold owned 2 rental apartments in the downtown Columbus area, each worth approximately $300,000, according to recent appraisals. The apartments were fully occupied with reliable tenants generating $2,100 per month in rental income each. Additionally, Harold owned a beach house in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, valued at $200,000. The property sat just 3 blocks from the ocean with 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, and access to a community pool. Attorney Brooks explained that the total inheritance value approached $800,000, plus the monthly rental income of $4,200. Harold had been meticulous with property management, maintaining detailed records of all expenses, repairs, and tenant information. The beach house had been his personal retreat, where he spent 2 weeks every summer reading and walking on the sand. The most surprising part was Harold's handwritten letter, sealed and included with the legal documents. In his careful script, Harold explained his decision. Amberly is the only family member who ever truly cared about me as a person rather than as a source of money. She deserves security and comfort in her retirement years. I hope these properties will give her the freedom to enjoy life without financial worry. Reading those words brought tears to my eyes. Harold had understood my struggles as a widow more deeply than I realized. He knew that my teacher's pension, while adequate, limited my options for travel home improvements or helping Derek with his growing expenses. This inheritance would change everything for me, and I could hardly contain my excitement about sharing the news. I immediately began planning how to use this unexpected windfall. The beach house could become our family vacation spot where Derek and Paige could escape the stress of their busy careers. I imagined future grandchildren building sand castles and learning to swim in the ocean. The rental income would supplement my pension beautifully, allowing me to be more generous with gifts and perhaps even establish college funds for those grandchildren I dreamed about. Attorney Brooks walked me through the probate process, explaining that the inheritance would be finalized within 60 days. During that time, I would need to decide whether to keep the rental properties or sell them for a lump sum. He recommended meeting with a financial advisor to discuss the tax implications and long-term investment strategies. Everything felt overwhelming but wonderfully exciting. I drove home in a state of pure joy, already composing the conversation I would have with Derek and Paige. They had been under tremendous stress lately, with Derek mentioning credit card debt and Paige complaining about their mortgage payments. This inheritance would ease their worries too, knowing that I finally had true financial security. I could help them more substantially now, perhaps contributing to the vacation fund they had been trying to build, or assisting with home repairs they had been postponing. The autumn afternoon was perfect for good news, with golden leaves falling like confetti around my car as I pulled into the driveway. Derek's sedan was already there, which surprised me because he usually worked until 6 o'clock on weekdays. Paige's car sat beside his, meaning they were both home early. I assumed they had planned a surprise or perhaps wanted to discuss weekend plans. Walking toward my front door with the inheritance papers tucked safely in my purse, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Harold's generosity would ripple through our family for years to come, creating opportunities and memories we could never have imagined. I quickened my pace, eager to watch Derek's face when he learned about the apartments and the beach house. That's when I heard their voices through the door, speaking in urgent, hushed tones that made me pause with my key halfway to the lock. Something in their tone made me hesitate before announcing my arrival. Derek and Paige were speaking quietly but intensely, their words carrying the weight of serious discussion. Rather than interrupting what seemed like an important conversation, I decided to slip in through the side door near the kitchen and wait for a natural break in their discussion. The side door opened silently thanks to the hinges I had recently oiled. I set my purse down carefully on the kitchen counter and removed my shoes to avoid making noise on the hardwood floors. From the kitchen, I could hear their voices more clearly, though I couldn't yet make out specific words. They were in the living room, and their conversation had the urgency of people discussing something significant. Moving quietly down the hallway, I positioned myself where I could hear without being seen. Through the partially open doorway, I glimpsed Derek and Paige sitting on my sofa with papers spread across the coffee table. Paige was holding what appeared to be a legal document, reading from it while Derek listened intently. Neither of them looked happy. Paige's voice was crisp and businesslike as she read, "A conservatorship may be established when an individual demonstrates inability to manage their personal or financial affairs due to mental incapacity, cognitive decline, or diminished decision-making capabilities." She looked up at Derek. "This is exactly what we need. The timing couldn't be more perfect." My blood ran cold. They were discussing conservatorship's legal arrangements that stripped elderly people of their independence. Why would they be researching such a thing? Derek shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, running his hands through his hair, in the gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was nervous about something. "I still think there has to be another way," Derek said quietly. "She's not really that bad yet. Maybe we're overreacting." Paige's laugh was sharp and calculating. "Overreacting, Derek, your mother left the stove on 3 times last month. She got confused at the grocery store and couldn't remember where she parked. She's been making strange financial decisions like that ridiculous donation to the animal shelter. These are all signs of cognitive decline." I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they might hear it. The incidents Paige described had simple explanations. I had been distracted while cooking because I was worried about Derek's job stress. The grocery store confusion happened once when they were remodeling and moved all the aisles around. The donation to the animal shelter was deliberate and meaningful, honoring Richard's memory because he had always loved animals. Derek's voice carried doubt and guilt. "But she seems fine when we talk to her. She remembers everything about Dad, about my childhood. She gives good advice about work problems. That's how it starts." Paige insisted, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used when explaining dental procedures to children. Early-stage dementia patients maintain long-term memories while losing recent cognitive function. The fact that she seems normal sometimes makes it more dangerous, not less. She could hurt herself or make terrible financial mistakes. The papers rustled as Paige turned to another document. "Look at this checklist for establishing incompetency. We can document multiple incidents that demonstrate her declining judgment. The key is building a pattern that shows progressive deterioration." I felt sick listening to them discuss my mental capacity like I was already gone. Every normal moment of forgetfulness or distraction was being twisted into evidence of cognitive failure. They were pathologizing the ordinary experiences of aging, turning them into weapons against my independence. Derek was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. "Even if we could prove she needs help, why conservatorship? Why not just family involvement? We could help her manage things without taking away her rights." Paige's response chilled me to the bone. "Because she just inherited $800,000 from Harold." The words hit me like a physical blow. They already knew about the inheritance. How was that possible? I had just left Attorney Brooks' office, and the information was supposed to be confidential. Yet somehow, Paige knew the exact value of Harold's estate, including details I had only learned hours ago. "How did you find out about that?" Derek asked, echoing my own desperate question. "Angela works at First National Bank," Paige replied matter-of-factly. She handles estate transfers and saw the preliminary paperwork when Harold's accounts were being processed. "She called me yesterday because she was concerned about your mother suddenly having access to that much money given her recent behavioral changes." Angela was Paige's younger sister, and I had always thought she was sweet and professional during my banking visits. The idea that she was monitoring my accounts and reporting back to Paige felt like a violation that made my skin crawl. Banking information was supposed to be private, protected by federal regulations that prevented exactly this kind of unauthorized access. Derek's voice rose slightly. "That sounds illegal. Angela could lose her job for sharing customer information." Paige waved away his concern. "She's protecting an elderly client from potential financial exploitation. Banks have protocols for identifying and preventing elder abuse. Angela was being responsible." The twisted logic made me dizzy. They were portraying surveillance and privacy violations as protective measures, reframing their scheme as concern for my welfare. Every word revealed how carefully they had planned this betrayal, turning my own family relationships into tools for manipulation. Paige continued reading from her documents. "Once conservatorship is established, Derek becomes responsible for all financial decisions. He can sell properties, manage investments, and ensure the money is used appropriately for your mother's care." "What if she fights it?" Derek asked weakly. "She won't be able to," Paige replied with frightening confidence. "The beauty of conservatorship proceedings is that once someone is declared incompetent, their objections are considered further evidence of impaired judgment. Fighting the conservatorship actually strengthens the case for why it's necessary." I gripped the wall for support, struggling to process the legal trap they were constructing around me. The system designed to protect vulnerable elderly people was being weaponized to steal my independence and inheritance. My own son was participating in a scheme that would leave me powerless to control my own life. Derek's guilt was audible in his voice. "This feels wrong. She raised me, sacrificed everything for our family. Now we're plotting to take away her freedom." Paige moved closer to Derek on the sofa, her voice becoming softer and more persuasive. "We're not taking anything away. We're protecting her from herself and ensuring she gets proper care. Think about it rationally. Do you really believe a 67-year-old woman with early dementia should control $800,000 in real estate investments? Her manipulation was masterful, combining false concern with appeals to Derek's protective instincts. She was rewriting their theft as responsible family management, making Derek feel noble for participating in my destruction. Besides," Paige added with chilling pragmatism, "we deserve consideration after everything we've done for her. Who drove her to doctor appointments? Who checks on her every week? Who will be responsible for her care when she gets worse? This inheritance should benefit the family members who are actually taking care of her." The entitlement in her voice revealed the true motivation behind their scheme. They weren't concerned about my welfare or safety. They wanted Harold's money and were willing to destroy my autonomy to get it. My inheritance represented their solution to financial problems they had never discussed with me directly. As I listened to them plan my legal and financial destruction, one terrifying realization crystallized. They had been watching me, documenting my behavior and building their case for weeks, or maybe months. Every phone call, every visit, every interaction had been an opportunity to gather ammunition for this assault on my independence. The conversation continued with Paige outlining their timeline. They needed to act quickly before the inheritance was finalized, and I gained full control of Harold's properties. Once I legally owned the apartments and beach house, challenging my competency would become more complicated. They had a narrow window to destroy my life, and they intended to use every moment of it. Derek's final question froze me with terror. When do we start? Paige smiled as she answered, I already have. Paige reached for another folder from the stack of papers, her movements precise and calculated. She had clearly been preparing for this conversation for some time, organizing documents and evidence like a prosecutor building a case. The depth of her preparation terrified me more than anything I had heard so far. Angela has been incredibly helpful. Paige began opening the folder to reveal what appeared to be bank statements and transaction records. She's documented several concerning patterns in your mother's spending over the past 6 months. Derek leaned forward to examine the papers while Paige pointed to highlighted entries. I strained to hear her explanation, my stomach churning with the realization that my banking privacy had been systematically violated. This donation to the animal shelter, Paige said, tapping one of the highlighted transactions. $300 to an organization she had never supported before. When Angela asked her about it during her next visit, your mother seemed confused about why she had made such a large donation. That was completely false. I had researched the animal shelter carefully before donating, reading about their programs and financial transparency. The donation honored Richard's memory because he had always brought home stray cats and dogs, nursing them back to health before finding them proper homes. I had explained this to Angela when she asked about the transaction, and she had seemed touched by the story. Paige continued her character assassination. Then there's this purchase at Best Buy for $1,200. Angela asked what she had bought, and your mother claimed she couldn't remember. Classic sign of impulsive spending followed by memory gaps. Again, her description was deliberately misleading. I had bought a new television to replace the 20-year-old set that had finally died. The purchase was carefully researched and budgeted, not impulsive. When Angela asked about it, I had jokingly said I couldn't remember all the technical specifications the salesperson had explained, not that I couldn't remember making the purchase. Derek studied the bank records with growing concern. This does look strange when you see it all together like this. Angela has been documenting everything, Paige assured him. Each incident by itself seems minor, but the pattern clearly shows deteriorating judgment and impulse control. She's been building a comprehensive file that will be crucial for the conservatorship hearing. The methodical nature of their surveillance made my skin crawl. Angela had been transforming normal banking activities into evidence of mental decline, carefully editing context to support their predetermined conclusion. Every interaction had been a trap, with my honest responses twisted into signs of cognitive failure. Paige pulled out another set of documents. I've also been working on the medical component of our case. Dr. Margaret Foster is a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in dementia evaluations. I contacted her office 2 weeks ago. Derek looked surprised. You already called a doctor. What did you tell them? I explained that we were concerned family members seeking guidance about an elderly relative's declining mental state. Paige replied smoothly. I described several incidents that worried us and asked about evaluation options. My heart sank as I realized they were corrupting medical professionals with false information, poisoning the well before I even had a chance to defend myself. Dr. Foster would approach any interaction with me through the lens of Paige's manufactured concerns, looking for confirmation of problems that existed only in their imagination. What kind of incidents did you describe? Derek asked, his voice carrying a note of unease. Paige consulted her notes. I told Dr. Foster that your mother had gotten lost driving to the grocery store she's shopped at for years, that she sometimes forgets the names of close family members, and that she's been making increasingly erratic financial decisions. Each alleged incident was either completely fabricated or grossly distorted. I had never gotten lost driving to the grocery store. I had occasionally mixed up the names of Derek's childhood friends when telling stories a normal occurrence that had nothing to do with cognitive decline. My financial decisions were careful and deliberate, not erratic. Derek shifted uncomfortably. Did you mention that she still manages her household perfectly, that she reads constantly and stays informed about current events, that she gives thoughtful advice about complex situations? Paige's response revealed her strategic thinking. I focused on the areas of concern because that's what the doctor needs to evaluate. Emphasizing her strengths would minimize the severity of the problems we're trying to address. Her answer exposed the fundamental dishonesty of their approach. They were presenting a selectively edited version of my life, highlighting imaginary problems while concealing evidence of my continued competence. This wasn't medical evaluation. It was character assassination disguised as healthcare. Dr. Foster suggested that we schedule an intervention. Paige continued. A structured family meeting where we express our concerns and request that your mother undergo a comprehensive evaluation. If she refuses or becomes defensive, that resistance actually supports our case for involuntary assessment. The trap was beautifully designed. Agreeing to evaluation would validate their concerns, while refusing would be portrayed as further evidence of impaired judgment. Either response would advance their agenda while destroying my credibility and autonomy. Derek was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the complexity of Paige's scheme. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of moral conflict. This feels like we're manipulating the system. What if we're wrong about her condition? Paige's response was chillingly pragmatic. We can't afford to be wrong about $800,000, Derek. Your mother is almost 70 years old. Even if she's fine now, how long before she really does develop dementia or other age-related problems? This inheritance gives us the opportunity to ensure proper planning, while she can still understand what's happening. Her logic was seductive, but fundamentally flawed. She was arguing for preemptive control based on potential future incapacity using my age as justification for immediate action. The inheritance had transformed their concern from genuine family planning into urgent financial grab. Besides, Paige added with calculated manipulation, we've been carrying the burden of her care for years. Who drives her to doctor appointments when her car won't start? Who checks on her every week to make sure she's safe? Who will be responsible when she really can't live independently? We're already functioning as her caregivers. Formalizing that responsibility just makes financial sense. She was rewriting their minimal assistance as comprehensive caregiving, inflating occasional favors into full-time responsibility. Derek drove me to doctor appointments perhaps twice a year when my car was being serviced. Their weekly visits lasted an hour and usually involved me cooking dinner for them. They weren't providing care, they were accepting hospitality while planning my destruction. Derek's guilt made him vulnerable to her manipulation. I just keep thinking about how much she sacrificed for our family. Taking her independence feels like betrayal. Paige moved closer to Derek, placing her hand on his arm in a gesture of false comfort. She sacrificed for your future, Derek. Now we're planning for hers. A good conservatorship ensures she gets excellent care while preserving family assets for the next generation. It's responsible estate planning, not betrayal. Her reframing was masterful, transforming theft into stewardship and presenting their scheme as fulfilling my wishes rather than violating them. She was giving Derek permission to betray me by convincing him it was actually an act of love and responsibility. The timing is critical. Paige emphasized returning to the practical aspects of their plan. We need to initiate conservatorship proceedings before the inheritance is finalized. Once your mother legally owns those properties, challenging her competency becomes much more complicated. Derek nodded slowly, his resistance crumbling under the pressure of her arguments and timeline. What's our next step? Paige smiled with satisfaction. This weekend, we're going to stage an incident that clearly demonstrates your mother's dangerous confusion. I'm thinking something involving the stove or maybe getting lost while driving. Something serious enough to justify emergency intervention. The casual way she discussed staging evidence of my incompetence revealed the depth of her deception. They weren't responding to genuine concerns about my welfare. They were manufacturing crises to support their predetermined agenda. My safety and dignity were expendable resources in their quest for Harold's inheritance. Derek's voice was barely audible. We're really doing this. We're protecting our family's future, Paige corrected firmly. Your mother will be safe and well cared for, and the inheritance will be managed responsibly by people who understand her best interests. As I listened to them finalize plans for my destruction, one realization cut deeper than all the others. They had been living this lie for weeks or months, smiling at me while documenting my alleged failures, accepting my hospitality while plotting to steal my independence. Every interaction had been a performance with me as the unwitting audience to my own character assassination. The conversation was winding down, but Paige had one final revelation that made my blood freeze. Dr. Foster has agreed to conduct an emergency evaluation Monday morning if we can demonstrate that your mother poses an immediate danger to herself or others. Angela will be there to provide banking evidence, and I'll present the medical history I've compiled. They had already scheduled my destruction for Monday morning. Whatever incident they staged this weekend would trigger an irreversible sequence of events leading to the loss of everything Harold had entrusted to me. I had less than 4 days to save myself from their betrayal. As they began gathering their papers and preparing to leave, I retreated quietly to my bedroom, my mind reeling with the magnitude of their conspiracy. They weren't just planning to steal my inheritance. They were systematically destroying my reputation, my relationships, and my autonomy. The son I had raised and loved was participating in my complete annihilation. But as I sat on my bed surrounded by the photos and memories of a lifetime spent caring for family, something shifted inside me. The shock was giving way to determination. They had underestimated me, completely assuming that because I was older and trusting, I was also helpless and naive. They were about to discover how wrong they were. I remained in my bedroom until I heard Derek and Paige leave, their voices carrying through the house as they discussed dinner plans with the casual normalcy of people who hadn't just planned someone's destruction. Only when their cars pulled out of the driveway did I allow myself to truly process what I had witnessed. The woman who had walked into this house an hour ago glowing with excitement about sharing wonderful news no longer existed. In her place sat someone harder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous than Derek and Paige could imagine. They had awakened something in me that had been dormant since Richard's death, the fierce protectiveness that had once made me advocate tirelessly for my students, the strategic thinking that had helped me navigate school district politics for 35 years. My first instinct was to confront them immediately, to call Derek and demand an explanation for their betrayal. But 35 years of dealing with manipulative parents, dishonest administrators, and scheming colleagues had taught me the value of patience and preparation. Emotional confrontations rarely achieved lasting victory. Careful planning and documented evidence, however, could destroy enemies completely. I spent that evening researching conservatorship laws on my laptop, discovering the frightening ease with which elderly people could lose their rights. Ohio statutes required only clear and convincing evidence of incapacity, a standard that determined prosecutors could meet through selective presentation of facts and expert testimony. Once conservatorship was granted reversing, it required proving a negative that I was competent despite a court's determination otherwise. The legal reality was sobering, but not hopeless. Conservatorship fraud was a recognized crime, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse carried serious criminal penalties. If I could document their scheme thoroughly enough, I might not only protect myself, but ensure they faced consequences for their betrayal. Over the following week, I began the most challenging performance of my life. When Derek and Paige visited or called, I acted exactly as I always had, warm and welcoming, while carefully monitoring my words and behavior. I couldn't afford to seem suspicious or defensive, since any change in my demeanor might alert them to my knowledge of their plan. The hardest part was watching Derek struggle with guilt, while I pretended ignorance of his internal conflict. When he hugged me goodbye after visits, his embrace lasted longer than usual, as if he were already mourning what he was about to destroy. Paige, in contrast, seemed energized by their secret, speaking more confidently and taking subtle control of conversations in ways that positioned her as my caregiver. To encourage their overconfidence, I began acting slightly more forgetful, making minor mistakes that would seem consistent with their narrative, while avoiding anything serious enough to actually concern them. I misplaced my reading glasses more frequently, occasionally forgot the day of the week, and once pretended to be confused about which bills I had already paid. These small performances served multiple purposes. They made Derek and Paige feel validated in their assessment, while preventing them from escalating their timeline. Most importantly, they established a baseline of believable confusion that would make my eventual sharp thinking appear even more dramatic in comparison. Simultaneously, I began gathering evidence of their conspiracy. The recording application on my smartphone proved invaluable, allowing me to capture conversations without them realizing what I was doing. Every visit became an opportunity to collect more documentation of their plans and motivations. Attorney Samuel Brooks became my secret ally without fully understanding the situation. I scheduled follow-up meetings about Harold's inheritance, using these appointments to ask seemingly innocent questions about conservatorship laws and elder abuse protections. His answers helped me understand the legal landscape, while his genuine concern for my welfare reminded me that honorable people still existed. The bank presented my biggest challenge. Angela's unauthorized access to my accounts was clearly illegal, but proving it required careful strategy. I began making small changes to my banking patterns, noting which activities generated follow-up questions and documenting the inappropriate nature of her inquiries. Each interaction was secretly recorded, building evidence of systematic privacy violations. Dr. Foster's office presented another opportunity for evidence gathering. I called, pretending to schedule a routine consultation, using the conversation to extract information about what Paige had told them. The receptionist's comments revealed details about the concerned family members who had contacted them, providing documentation of Paige's false medical reports. Meanwhile, I researched Derek and Paige's financial situation through public records and social media posts. Their spending patterns revealed significant credit card debt and a mortgage payment that stretched their income uncomfortably. Paige's recent purchases included expensive jewelry and clothing that seemed inconsistent with claims of financial stress. Their motivation wasn't difficult to understand once I saw their actual financial picture. The weekend arrived with ominous significance. I knew they planned to stage some kind of incident that would justify emergency intervention, so I prepared accordingly. I disabled my home security system and set up my phone to record continuously, ensuring that any staged emergency would be documented from my perspective. Saturday afternoon brought their attempted manipulation. Derek arrived unexpectedly, claiming he wanted to check on me because I had sounded tired during our last phone conversation. He spent an hour wandering through my house, ostensibly looking for maintenance issues, but actually creating an opportunity for Paige to arrive with groceries and insist on cooking dinner for us. Their coordination was obvious once I knew what to watch for. Derek engaged me in conversation in the living room, while Paige worked alone in the kitchen, giving her unsupervised access to my appliances. When they called me to dinner an hour later, the smell of gas was noticeable but not overwhelming. Paige's performance was Academy Award worthy. She noticed the smell, first expressing concern and rushing to check the stove. Derek joined her in the kitchen, and together they discovered that one of the pilot lights had been extinguished, allowing gas to accumulate. Their shock and worry seemed completely genuine as they opened windows and called the gas company. Within minutes, my kitchen was filled with concerned neighbors who had been summoned by Derek's urgent phone calls. The gas company technician confirmed a dangerous leak and recommended that I avoid using the stove until it could be professionally serviced. Everyone agreed that I had been incredibly fortunate to avoid a serious accident. Throughout the crisis, I maintained my recording while acting appropriately confused and grateful for their intervention. Paige positioned herself as my primary caregiver, coordinating with the technician and neighbors, while Derek documented everything with his phone camera. They were building their evidence in real time, creating a record of my dangerous incompetence. But I was building evidence too. My recording captured Paige's whispered instructions to Derek about what to tell the neighbors. Her quiet comment about perfect timing was particularly damning, as was Derek's nervous response that they needed to make sure everything looks right. Their coordination was too smooth, their reactions too prepared for people experiencing a genuine emergency. As neighbors and technicians cleared out of my house, Paige suggested that I might be more comfortable staying with them for a few days while the stove was being repaired. The offer seemed caring and reasonable to outside observers, but I recognized it as an attempt to control my environment before Monday's scheduled intervention. I declined, graciously explaining that I was perfectly comfortable using my microwave and electric kettle until the repairs were completed. Derek looked relieved by my refusal, his guilt preventing him from pushing too hard for arrangements that would isolate me from potential allies. That evening, as I reviewed my recordings and organized my evidence, I felt a cold satisfaction settling over me. They had given me everything I needed to expose their conspiracy while simultaneously proving my own competence and strategic thinking. Their attempt to manufacture evidence of my incompetence had instead documented their own criminal behavior. Monday's intervention would indeed be a turning point in our family relationships, but Derek and Paige were about to discover that they had miscalculated both my vulnerability and my willingness to fight back. The woman they thought they could manipulate and control had spent the weekend preparing for war. I had learned from the best teacher life could provide betrayal by the people you love most, and I was ready to graduate with honors. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I prepared for the battle ahead. I knew Dr. Foster's evaluation was scheduled, but I needed to understand exactly how deep the conspiracy reached before I could effectively counter it. My first stop would be the bank where Angela's illegal surveillance had provided the foundation for their case against me. I arrived at First National Bank precisely at opening time, accompanied by Attorney Brooks, whom I had contacted Sunday evening with carefully edited details about my concerns regarding account privacy. I presented our visit as a routine review of my banking relationships following Harold's inheritance, but my real purpose was gathering evidence of Angela's unauthorized access to my personal information. The bank manager, Mrs. Catherine Walsh, was a professional woman in her early 50s who took customer privacy seriously. When I explained that family members seemed to know details about my banking activities that I hadn't shared with them, her expression grew concerned. She immediately pulled up my account access logs, which revealed the extent of Angela's surveillance. The records were damning. Angela had accessed my account information 43 times over the past 6 months, far exceeding any legitimate banking purpose. She had reviewed transaction details, printed statements, and even researched the sources of deposits and the recipients of payments. Most alarming, she had created detailed notes about my spending patterns, complete with personal observations about my mental state during banking visits. Mrs. Walsh was horrified by the breach of customer confidentiality. "This is completely unacceptable and potentially criminal," she assured me while printing copies of the access logs. Federal banking regulations strictly prohibit employees from accessing customer information without legitimate business purposes. Angela will be terminated immediately and will cooperate fully with any legal action you choose to pursue. Attorney Brooks documented everything, meticulously explaining that unauthorized access to financial records was a serious federal crime that could result in substantial fines and imprisonment. The evidence we gathered would not only discredit Angela's surveillance, but potentially invalidate any medical or legal proceedings based on her falsified reports. Our next stop was Dr. Foster's office, where I had scheduled what I claimed was a consultation about memory concerns. My real purpose was documenting the false information Paige had provided and demonstrating my actual mental competence through direct interaction with the psychiatrist. Dr. Margaret Foster was a thoughtful woman with silver hair and intelligent eyes who specialized in geriatric mental health. She welcomed me warmly, explaining that concerned family members had contacted her about potential cognitive issues. I allowed her to begin her standard evaluation while carefully steering the conversation toward the specific claims Paige had made. "Your daughter-in-law mentioned that you had gotten lost driving to familiar locations," Dr. Foster noted, consulting her file. "Can you tell me about any difficulties you've experienced with navigation or memory while driving?" I responded honestly, explaining that I had never been lost driving to the grocery store or any other familiar destination. The only recent confusion had occurred when the store was being remodeled and the parking lot layout had changed temporarily. Dr. Foster made careful notes, and I could see her reassessing the information she had received. As we continued the evaluation, I systematically addressed each of Paige's fabricated concerns while demonstrating clear thinking and excellent memory. Dr. Foster's initial wariness gave way to puzzlement as my responses contradicted the family reports she had received. I performed well on cognitive tests, displayed appropriate emotional responses, and showed no signs of the confusion or impairment that had been described to her. "Mrs. Henderson," Dr. Foster said finally, "I'm finding significant discrepancies between the concerns your family expressed and your actual presentation today. Would you be comfortable if I recorded our conversation?" Sometimes family members misinterpret normal aging processes as signs of cognitive decline, and objective documentation can help clarify the situation. I agreed immediately, knowing that recorded evidence of my competence would be invaluable in any legal proceedings. Dr. Foster's professional assessment would carry significant weight against Paige's manufactured medical history, especially when combined with documentation of the banking fraud and staged emergencies. My phone buzzed during the appointment with a text from Derek. "Mom, Paige and I want to come over this afternoon to talk about some things that are worrying us. Can we meet around 2 o'clock? The intervention was beginning exactly as they had planned, but now I was prepared with evidence and allies they couldn't have anticipated. I responded positively to Derek's text while finishing my session with Dr. Foster. She provided me with a preliminary assessment stating that I showed no signs of cognitive impairment or diminished decision-making capacity. Her written opinion would serve as professional contradictory evidence to Paige's amateur psychological diagnosis. Returning home, I contacted Randy Morrison, Derek's childhood friend, who worked in construction and had always maintained an independent relationship with our family. Randy had called me the previous evening with disturbing information about Derek's recent behavior, and I suspected his knowledge might be crucial to understanding the full scope of their conspiracy. Randy arrived at my house an hour before Derek and Paige's scheduled intervention, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by serious concern. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to tell you something that's been bothering me for weeks," he began. "Derek asked me to do something that felt really wrong." According to Randy, Derek had approached him 3 weeks earlier with an unusual request. Derek wanted Randy to visit me during a time when I might be confused or disoriented, then document the incident with photos or video that could be used to demonstrate my declining mental state. Derek had suggested staging the visit during evening hours when older people were more likely to be tired and confused. Randy had refused, immediately telling Derek that the request felt like manipulation and betrayal. Derek had backed down quickly, but asked Randy not to mention the conversation to anyone else. Randy's conscience had bothered him ever since, particularly after he noticed how frequently Derek and Paige had been visiting me and asking pointed questions about my daily activities. "I kept thinking about how good you were to Derek after his dad died," Randy explained. "You deserved better than having people plot against you. I finally decided I had to warn you even if it cost me Derek's friendship." Randy's testimony provided crucial evidence that their conspiracy had been active for weeks and involved multiple attempts to manufacture evidence of my incompetence. His willingness to testify on my behalf would help establish the premeditated nature of their scheme. With Randy's support documented and Dr. Foster's assessment secured, I felt ready for the afternoon confrontation. But first, I had one more piece of evidence to gather. I called Paige's sister Angela at her home number recording the conversation, while expressing concern about the banking irregularities Mrs. Walsh had discovered. Angela's panic was immediate and overwhelming. She began crying within minutes, confessing that Paige had pressured her to monitor my banking activities and report anything that could be interpreted as confusion or poor judgment. Angela had initially resisted, but eventually agreed because she was afraid of losing her job during a difficult economy. "Paige said you were showing signs of dementia and that the family needed to protect you from making terrible financial mistakes," Angela sobbed. She made it sound like I was helping prevent elder abuse, not participating in it. "I never meant to hurt you, Mrs. Henderson. I was just scared and stupid." Angela's confession provided the final piece of evidence I needed. Her admission that Paige had orchestrated the banking surveillance would completely discredit the financial concerns that form the foundation of their competency case. Combined with Dr. Foster's assessment and Randy's testimony about Derek's attempted manipulation, I had assembled a comprehensive defense against their conspiracy. As 2 o'clock approached, I felt calmer than I had in days. Derek and Paige were walking into a trap they had inadvertently set for themselves. Their careful planning would become evidence of premeditation, their concern would be exposed as greed, and their manipulation would demonstrate exactly the kind of calculated deception that courts punished severely. I positioned myself in the living room with my recording equipment ready and my evidence organized for maximum impact. When Derek and Paige arrived for their intervention, they would discover that their target had become a predator and their carefully planned ambush had become their own destruction. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, and I opened it with a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. Derek and Paige entered my living room with the solemn expressions of people preparing to deliver difficult news. They had clearly rehearsed this intervention, coordinating their approach to maximize emotional impact while minimizing my ability to resist their recommendations. Paige carried a leather portfolio that I suspected contained the conservatorship paperwork they intended to pressure me into accepting. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation about some things that have been worrying us." Derek began, his voice heavy with manufactured concern. He positioned himself on the sofa where he could maintain eye contact while appearing non-threatening. Paige sat beside him, her posture professionally supportive. I settled into my favorite armchair, the recording app activated on my phone, and my evidence folder within easy reach. "Of course, dear. I'm always happy to talk with you both. What's been concerning you?" Paige opened her portfolio and extracted several documents. "We've been noticing some changes in your behavior over the past few months that suggest you might be experiencing early cognitive decline. We love you too much to ignore these warning signs." Derek's discomfort was visible as Paige took the lead in their presentation. "Saturday's incident with the stove really scared us, Mom. You could have been seriously hurt or even killed if we hadn't discovered that gas leak when we did." I nodded thoughtfully, playing my role as the concerned but confused elderly mother. "That was frightening. I'm so grateful you both were there to help me." "That's exactly what worries us," Paige continued smoothly. "You didn't notice the smell of gas, which suggests possible sensory impairment. You also couldn't remember turning off that burner, which indicates memory gaps that could be dangerous." Their version of Saturday's events was carefully edited to support their narrative. They had transformed their staged emergency into evidence of my incompetence while positioning themselves as my saviors. If I hadn't recorded their planning and execution, their story might have been convincing. Derek pulled out his phone and showed me photos he had taken during the gas leak incident. "Look how confused you seem in these pictures, Mom. Paige had to guide you out of the kitchen because you weren't responding appropriately to the emergency." The photos were indeed damaging, showing me looking bewildered and disoriented during the staged crisis. Derek had carefully captured moments when I appeared most vulnerable, building visual evidence to support their claims of cognitive impairment. Paige spread additional documents across my coffee table. "We've also been tracking some concerning financial decisions that suggest impaired judgment. Your recent donation to the animal shelter, the expensive television purchase, and some unusual banking patterns that have worried the staff at First National. Angela's surveillance reports were presented as professional banking concerns rather than privacy violations. Each normal transaction had been reframed as evidence of confusion or poor judgment, creating a pattern that appeared compelling when viewed through their distorted lens. Dr. Foster has agreed to evaluate your mental state," Derek added reluctantly. "She specializes in helping families navigate these difficult transitions. We've already shared our concerns with her, and she's standing by to provide professional assessment and recommendations." The way they presented Dr. Foster's involvement made it sound like a done deal rather than an option. They were gradually eliminating my choices while making their control seem inevitable and medically necessary. Paige leaned forward with practiced empathy. "We know this is difficult to hear, but we're recommending that Derek become your conservator. This would allow him to help manage your finances and healthcare decisions while ensuring you receive appropriate care and supervision." Derek produced the conservatorship paperwork with obvious reluctance. "It's really just a formality, Mom. You would still live in your own house and make your own daily decisions. We would just handle the big financial stuff to protect you from making costly mistakes." Their presentation was masterfully manipulative, making the complete loss of my legal rights sound like a minor administrative adjustment. They were offering to steal my independence while convinced that they were providing loving care. I allowed several moments of silence to pass while I appeared to consider their proposal. Derek watched me anxiously, his guilt making him hope I would resist so he could abandon the scheme with a clear conscience. Paige remained focused and determined, her eyes already calculating how quickly they could finalize the arrangements. Finally, I spoke with the slightly confused tone they expected. This is so much to absorb. You really think I'm not capable of managing my own affairs anymore? It's not about capability, Paige assured me quickly. It's about safety and protection. Your inheritance from Harold makes these decisions even more important. $800,000 requires professional management, especially with your recent memory concerns. Derek flinched when Paige mentioned the inheritance amount, realizing too late that they had revealed knowledge I hadn't shared with them. I seized the opening immediately. How did you know about Harold's inheritance? I asked with perfect innocence. I haven't told anyone the specific amounts yet. Paige's recovery was smooth, but not quite quick enough. Angela mentioned seeing some estate paperwork when you were at the bank. She was concerned about the complexity of managing such significant assets. Angela discussed my private banking information with you? I let confusion creep into my voice. Isn't that against bank regulations? Derek shot a warning glance at Paige, recognizing the dangerous territory they were entering. But Paige pressed forward confidently, unaware of the trap closing around them. Angela was being responsible, Paige explained. Bank employees are trained to identify situations where elderly clients might need additional support. She was protecting your interests. I nodded slowly, then reached for my evidence folder. That's interesting. I had a meeting with the bank manager this morning about these privacy concerns. The color drained from Paige's face as I produced Mrs. Walsh's documentation of Angela's unauthorized account access. Derek read the papers with growing horror, realizing for the first time the extent of their sister-in-law's illegal surveillance. 43 unauthorized access events over 6 months. I read aloud from the bank's report. Federal banking regulations classify this as serious criminal misconduct. Angela has been terminated and the bank is cooperating with federal investigators. Derek's voice was barely a whisper. Mom, we had no idea Angela was breaking the law. Really? I pulled out my phone and played Angela's recorded confession. Her tearful admission that Paige had pressured her into monitoring my accounts filled the room with damning evidence of conspiracy and manipulation. Paige's professional composure finally cracked. You recorded a private phone conversation without consent. That's illegal wiretapping. Actually, Ohio is a one-party consent state, I replied calmly. I'm perfectly entitled to record conversations I participate in, just like I recorded your planning session last Monday. The blood drained from Derek's face as I played the recording of their conservatorship conspiracy. Their voices filled my living room, discussing how to manufacture evidence of my incompetence and steal Harold's inheritance. Derek's reluctant participation and Paige's calculating manipulation were captured in devastating detail. You've been planning this for weeks. I continued producing Randy's sworn statement about Derek's attempt to stage incidents of my confusion. Multiple conspiracy charges, elder abuse fraud, identity theft, and now we can add attempted conservatorship fraud to the list. Derek was staring at the evidence in shock, only now understanding the full scope of what they had been attempting. Mom, I never wanted to hurt you. Paige said we were protecting you. From $800,000, I replied coldly. How exactly was stealing my inheritance protecting me, Derek? Paige made one final attempt at manipulation. You're proving our point about paranoid thinking and poor judgment. Recording family conversations and making wild accusations shows exactly the kind of mental instability we've been concerned about. I smiled at her with genuine amusement. Is that your professional psychiatric opinion, Paige? because Dr. Foster reached quite different conclusions after evaluating me this morning. I produced Dr. Foster's written assessment documenting my complete mental competence and noting the significant discrepancies between my actual condition and the family reports she had received. The psychiatrist they had planned to use against me had instead provided expert testimony for my defense. Derek was crying now, the full weight of his betrayal finally hitting him. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I never should have listened to her. I never should have agreed to any of this." "You're right," I agreed matter-of-factly. "You shouldn't have. But you did, and now there will be consequences." I gathered all the evidence and placed it back in my folder. "Attorney Brooks is filing criminal charges against both of you tomorrow morning. Elder abuse carries up to 8 years in prison in Ohio, and conspiracy to commit fraud adds another 5 years. Angela is cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence." Paige's last vestige of control finally shattered. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against ours." "It's recorded evidence against your recorded evidence," I corrected her. "Plus, bank records, medical assessments, witness testimony, and your own documented attempts at manufacturing false evidence. Federal prosecutors love cases this well documented." Derek looked at me with desperate hope. "Is there anything we can do? Any way to make this right?" I considered his questions seriously, studying the son I had raised and loved, who had been willing to destroy me for money. "The criminal charges are out of my hands now, Derek. Law enforcement takes elder abuse very seriously, and the evidence is too clear to ignore." Paige made one last desperate play. "We'll disappear, leave town, and never bother you again." "That would be fleeing prosecution," I pointed out. "It would only make your sentences longer when they catch you." As Derek and Paige sat in my living room surrounded by the wreckage of their conspiracy, I felt a cold satisfaction settling over me. They had underestimated me completely, assuming that because I was older and trusting, I was also helpless and naive. They had discovered too late that betraying someone who had spent 35 years dealing with manipulation and deception was a catastrophic mistake. The son I had raised was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life, and his wife was about to discover that some prey fights back with lethal precision. 6 months later, I stood in Judge Patricia Caldwell's courtroom, watching Paige receive her sentence. 18 months in state prison for elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The judge's words rang with appropriate severity. The systematic manipulation and betrayal of a family member's trust represents a particularly heinous form of abuse that undermines the basic bonds of human relationship. Derek had received 12 months of probation and 200 hours of community service, primarily because his cooperation with prosecutors and genuine remorse had convinced the court that he was more victim than perpetrator of Paige's manipulation. The judge required him to attend counseling and prohibited any contact with me without court supervision. Angela faced federal charges for banking privacy violations and received a substantial fine, community service, and permanent prohibition from working in financial services. Her cooperation with the investigation had prevented a longer prison sentence, but her career in banking was permanently destroyed. The legal proceedings had been surprisingly swift once law enforcement reviewed the evidence I had collected. Federal prosecutors praised the thoroughness of my documentation, noting that elder abuse cases rarely featured such comprehensive proof of premeditated conspiracy. Detective Sarah Martinez, who led the investigation, told me that my strategic thinking and evidence gathering had created a textbook case for prosecuting financial exploitation of elderly victims. The inheritance from Harold was finalized without any complications, giving me full ownership of the 2 downtown apartments and the Myrtle Beach beach house. The monthly rental income of $4,200 had already transformed my financial security, allowing me to make improvements to my home and establish the savings buffer I had always dreamed of having. But the most significant changes in my life weren't financial. The experience of fighting for my independence had awakened capabilities I hadn't used since my teaching career ended. Attorney Brooks asked me to consult on other elder abuse cases, helping victims understand their legal options and develop strategies for protecting themselves. My background in education and my recent experience as a target made me an effective advocate for other vulnerable seniors. Dr. Foster invited me to speak at conferences about recognizing and preventing elder abuse, sharing my story with medical professionals who needed to understand how manipulation could corrupt family relationships. My presentation about the warning signs of financial exploitation had already helped several doctors identify and intervene in similar situations. The beach house in Myrtle Beach became my retreat and therapy, a place where I could process the trauma of betrayal while rebuilding my sense of safety and trust. I spent 2 weeks there each month, walking on the sand that Harold had loved and reading books that reminded me of the joy that existed beyond family drama. Most surprisingly, I had developed genuine friendships with other women who had survived similar betrayals. Detective Martinez introduced me to a support group for elder abuse survivors, where I met remarkable women who had overcome financial exploitation, medical manipulation, and family conspiracies. These new relationships provided the emotional support I needed while proving that trust could be rebuilt with people who had earned it through actions rather than biology. Randy Morrison had become an unexpected ally and friend, checking on me regularly and helping with home maintenance projects. His loyalty during the crisis had demonstrated the value of choosing family rather than simply accepting the family you were born into. Derek's childhood friend had shown more integrity in one conversation than Derek had managed in months of planning my destruction. The downtown apartments required more management than I had anticipated, but the challenge energized me in ways I hadn't expected. Learning about property maintenance, tenant relations, and real estate law gave me new purposes and skills that kept my mind sharp and engaged. Harold's investment wisdom proved sound, with both properties appreciating in value while providing steady income. Derek had requested supervised meetings 3 times since his sentencing, each conversation monitored by a court-appointed mediator who ensured that he couldn't manipulate or pressure me. His remorse appeared genuine, but trust would require years of consistent behavior rather than months of apologetic words. I had agreed to consider rebuilding our relationship gradually, but only if he demonstrated real change through his actions. The mediator, Dr. Robert Chen, specialized in helping families recover from financial abuse and betrayal. He explained that sons who participated in elder abuse often struggled with misplaced loyalty to spouses who manipulated their protective instincts. Derek's counseling focused on recognizing manipulation and developing the independence necessary to resist future pressure from exploitative partners. During our last supervised meeting, Derek had brought photos of himself volunteering at a senior center, fulfilling his community service requirement by helping elderly residents with technology and transportation. His work with other seniors seemed to be teaching him about the dignity and wisdom that age could represent, rather than the vulnerability and burden that Paige had emphasized. "I understand if you never forgive me," Derek had said during that meeting. "I just want you to know that I'm trying to become the man you raised me to be, not the person I became when I let fear and greed corrupt my judgment." I had told him that forgiveness was possible, but trust would require time and proof. The son I had loved still existed somewhere inside the man who had betrayed me, but I would never again assume that genetic relationships guaranteed loyalty or protection. Paige's imprisonment had revealed additional victims of her manipulation. Her ex-husband contacted me through attorney Brooks, sharing stories about financial deception and emotional abuse that predated her relationship with Derek. Paige's sister Angela wasn't her first accomplice. She had a pattern of recruiting family members and co-workers into schemes that enriched her at others' expense. The divorce proceedings between Derek and Paige were finalized while she was serving her sentence. Derek discovered that she had been hiding credit card debt and had taken out loans against their house without his knowledge. The financial pressure that had motivated their conspiracy against me had been largely created by Paige's secret spending and poor decision-making. As I reflected on the lessons learned through this ordeal, several truths became clear. First, trust should be earned through consistent actions over time, not assumed because of family relationships. Second, competence and wisdom don't diminish with age, and elderly people deserve the same respect and autonomy granted to younger adults. Third, documentation and evidence are crucial weapons against manipulation and gaslighting. Most importantly, I learned that self-worth cannot be dependent on others' approval or love. My value as a person existed independently of Derek's betrayal or acceptance, and protecting my dignity and independence was not selfish, but necessary for maintaining my identity and purpose. The inheritance from Harold had given me more than financial security. It had provided the opportunity to discover my own strength and resilience. His trust in my judgment had been validated through my successful defense against conspiracy and fraud. The properties he left me would continue generating income for decades, ensuring that I could maintain independence regardless of future family relationships. I often thought about Harold's letter explaining his decision to name me as his sole beneficiary. He had recognized something in me that I had forgotten about myself: the strength to stand alone when necessary, and the wisdom to build meaningful relationships with people who deserved trust. His final gift hadn't just been money and property, it had been the chance to rediscover my own capabilities and worth. The story of my family's betrayal and my successful resistance had become something larger than personal vindication. Speaking at conferences and consulting on legal cases allowed me to transform my painful experience into protection for others facing similar threats. Every elderly person who recognized manipulation before it destroyed their lives validated the importance of sharing these lessons. Today I live peacefully in the house where I raised Derek, surrounded by chosen family who value my contributions and respect my independence. The downtown apartments provide both income and purpose, while the beach house offers solitude and healing when I need to restore my spirit. Harold's inheritance secured my financial future, but more importantly, it gave me the chance to secure my emotional and psychological future as well. Some days I wonder if Derek will ever fully understand the magnitude of what he almost destroyed. The trust between parent and child, once broken by betrayal, requires extraordinary effort to rebuild. Whether that rebuilding is possible remains to be seen, but my happiness no longer depends on his choices or his presence in my life. I have learned to find joy in small victories, helping another elder abuse victim recognize manipulation, watching the sunset from my beach house porch, receiving rent payments that honor Harold's investment wisdom, and waking up each morning knowing that I control my own destiny. The woman who walked into this house 6 months ago excited to share inheritance news with her beloved son was naive about the capacity for betrayal that exists in even the closest relationships. The woman I became through fighting that betrayal is stronger, wiser, and more selectively trusting. I prefer who I am now, even though the education was painful. As I finish telling you this story, I want you to think about the elderly people in your own life. Are you watching for signs that someone might be taking advantage of their trust? Are you respecting their autonomy and decision-making abilities? Or are you assuming that age equals incompetence? Have you ever considered how quickly financial inheritance can corrupt family relationships and turn love into greed? Most importantly, if you're facing a situation where family members are questioning your competence or pressuring you to surrender control of your life, remember that age doesn't diminish your right to dignity, independence, and respect. Document everything. Seek professional help, and never assume that manipulation is actually care disguised as concern. Please like this story if it resonated with you. Subscribe to hear more stories about family betrayal and triumph. And share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding how elder abuse really works. Your comments about your own experiences or questions about legal protection would mean the world to me and to other viewers who might be facing similar challenges. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you protect yourself or someone you love from the devastating betrayal of trust that nearly destroyed my life. Remember that fighting back is always possible regardless of your age, and that victory belongs to those who refuse to surrender their dignity without a battle. May you never need the lessons I learned, but if you do, may you have the courage to fight for the life and independence you deserve.